In the observational phase of the study, participants were more likely to express outrage over time if their social network's level of outrage was higher. And then in our experimental studies, when we manipulated a news feed to have more moral outrage, participants were more likely to choose to express more outrage in the beginning of the experiment. So they're learning very quickly.
What exactly is moral outrage?
Moral outrage is a really important emotion and behavior. And moral outrage in particular motivates punishment when people perceive that a moral transgression has occurred. And the reason why it's very important for society is because it helps promote social cooperation, and it can also catalyze collective action. It tells us what should we be concerned about in terms of our sense of right and wrong.
If people are expressing more moral outrage, does that mean that they are feeling more outraged or just that they are expressing it more?
Yeah, that's a really important point. And one of the fascinating parts of studying politics and morality on social media is that actually there is no way to know that. I could be genuinely upset and express it, or I could be just typing it. And there's no way for a user to actually know what the author is actually feeling when they're sitting at their computer or smartphone.
Are you saying that they are performing outrage more in order to receive these likes?
I think it's actually perfectly possible and often occurs where people generally are expressing outrage. They can get rewarded for it. It makes them more likely to do it, but they're still, even when they're getting rewarded, they're still doing it genuinely.
Is expressing outrage an inherently bad thing, either for the person expressing it or for society as a whole? Does it matter if people are expressing more outrage?
I think moral outrage has extremely important functions for society, as I mentioned before. It raises awareness of the things that we should be morally concerned about. The question is, to what extent does social media create a situation in which there's so much moral outrage that it's hard for us to discern what is really worthy of our moral concern?
If everyone is outraged about everything, then they might as well be outraged about nothing.
That's one way to put it. Yeah.
I am a self-confessed avid tweeter. What does your research mean for me?
I think we all have this awareness of what type of content gets us the most social reward. But I think it's important to keep in mind, how is it impacting what you're posting, especially in the realm of things like morality, politics, things that might be prone to disinformation.
You mentioned disinformation, and earlier in the show, we've been hearing about the lack of uptake in vaccines in younger people and possibly social media being one of the things that affects that. Are certain topics more susceptible to this kind of moral outrage than others, or at least this kind of polarization than others?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially in the US and some other countries in Europe, polarization is so high. And what that means is that a lot of topics, as soon as they get politicized, they become polarizing where people feel like they have to choose one or the other view. And that tends to elicit moral outrage because these days, more than ever, our moral values are actually infused with our political identity. And this actually sometimes can become dangerous because it makes people sometimes think more simplistically in terms of like black or white thinking about issues. There is research in social psychology suggesting that when people are in a angered or outraged state, they tend to be worse decision makers. And so that has implications for how we're discerning information, whether it's authentic or fake news. My goal is to just make people more aware, educate them about how they might be impacted. Let them use that information for what they will. Maybe they'll express less outrage, maybe they won't, but just make people more educated about how the platforms could be influencing them.